Chapter 1. The Unraveling. The rain against the penthouse windows sounded like 1,000 tiny accusations. Ilara Vance stood at the floor-to-ceiling glass, a crystal tumbler of whiskey dangling from her fingers, watching the lights of Manhattan blur and bleed into the wet darkness. Behind her, the spacious living room, a masterpiece of minimalist design in shades of gray and cream, felt less like a home and more like a very expensive waiting room, a waiting room for a life that had already left. The click of the front door was soft, deliberate. She didn't turn. She knew the rhythm of his steps, the slight hesitation before he entered a room she occupied. Once, that hesitation had been anticipation. Now, it was reconnaissance. "You're still up." Liam's voice was tired, stripped of the warm, gravelly tone that used to say her name like a secret. "You exist. I see you." The board meeting ran late. The Singapore acquisition. He continued, his footsteps moving toward the kitchen. She heard the fridge open, the clink of a bottle. "I made dinner," Ilara said, her voice unnaturally calm. "It's in the oven, or it was, 7 hours ago." Silence, then a sigh, not of remorse, but of weary inconvenience. "Ilara, we talked about this. I can't control these things. We talked about this." Their marriage, once a vibrant tapestry of shared dreams and whispered promises, had been reduced to a series of talks about schedules, about social obligations, about the careful maintenance of a facade. They hadn't talked about the way his touch had become perfunctory, or how her laughter had dried up, or about the vast, silent continent of loneliness that had grown between them in their own bed. He was leaning against the marble kitchen island, still in his impeccably tailored charcoal suit, tie loosened. At 42, Liam was the picture of achieved ambition. Sharp jawline slightly softened by long hours, dark hair with distinguished threads of silver at the temples. He was handsome, successful, and to the outside world utterly devoted. He was also a stranger. "What are we doing, Liam?" The question left her lips, quiet and devastating. He took a long pull from his water bottle, avoiding her eyes. "It's been a long day. Can we not do this tonight?" "When then?" she asked, the calm cracking. "When is a good time to discuss the collapse of our marriage? Your calendar must be booked solid with the collapse of other things. Companies, markets, mergers. Where does us fit in?" He put the bottle down with a sharp thud. "Don't be dramatic, Ilara. We're in a rough patch. You knew the life this was when you married me." The life. She had married Liam Vance, the brilliant, driven finance whiz, not the CEO of Vance Capital. She'd married the man who read poetry aloud to her in Washington Square Park, who got hopelessly lost with her in the Vermont woods just to see the fall colors, who cried, actually cried when she showed him the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. The life she'd known was one of passion and partnership. The life she had now was a solo performance with a critically absent co-star. "I knew you," she whispered, the anger deflating into a profound sorrow. "I don't know who this is." She gestured vaguely at him, at the room, at the invisible weight of his empire. His expression hardened, the mask of the unflappable CEO sliding firmly into place. "I provide everything for you, Ilara. This apartment, your charity board position, your freedom. What more do you want?" It was the wrong thing to say, the final, definitive wrong thing. The words hung in the sterile air, and Ilara felt something within her break cleanly, like a bone. Not a messy fracture, but a clean surgical separation. "I want a divorce." The words were so simple. They didn't feel like hers. They felt like something she was reading from a terrible, inevitable script. Liam stared at her, his composure faltering for a single, glorious second. Shock, then a flicker of what might have been pain, before it was buried under a wave of cold pragmatism. "Don't be ridiculous. You're upset. We'll talk in the morning." "There's nothing left to talk about," she said, placing the untouched whiskey on a side table. She felt eerily light. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours." She walked past him, toward the bedroom but not to sleep beside him, to the walk-in closet, to the safe inside. Behind jewelry boxes and forgotten mementos was a small worn leather portfolio. Her escape plan, meticulously and sorrowfully built over the last 2 years. Statements for an account in her maiden name, funded by the modest inheritance from her grandmother he'd told her was insignificant, but she'd quietly nurtured. The deed to a property. A single folded piece of paper with a phone number. Ilara, wait. His voice stopped her at the bedroom door. It had changed. The weariness was gone, replaced by something sharper, almost pleading. Just wait. What about the gala next week? The press, my investors. A bitter laugh escaped her. Of course. The facade. Always the facade. You'll manage, Liam. You always do. As dawn tinged the skyline pink, she booked a one-way ticket out of the life she'd built, and the one that had built itself around her, swallowing her whole. Chapter 2. The Refuge of Sparrows Creek. The Connecticut countryside unfolded in a lush green embrace, a balm to her city-scorched soul. Sparrows Creek was a postcard of quaint New England charm. A main street with clapboard shops, a white-steepled church, and a creek that bubbled cheerfully under stone bridges. Her grandmother's cottage, Whispering Pines, sat at the end of a winding lane, nestled under the ancient trees that gave it its name. It was small, slightly shabby, and smelled of pine needles, beeswax, and memories. The first week was a symphony of silence and small, tangible tasks. She cleaned out decades of dust, aired out linens, and battled the determined ivy attempting to reclaim the front porch. She didn't cry for Liam, or for the life she'd left. She felt numb, a dull reset to its factory settings. Her only company was the radio, tuned to the local station that played folk music, and reported on town council meetings and the upcoming Founders' Day festival. It was at the town's only proper hardware store, Carter & Son, that the silence broke. She was wrestling with a stubborn, rusted latch on the garden shed, when the old brass screw she was trying to extract sheared off with a definitive ping. "Damn it," she muttered, a word that felt too harsh for the gentle air. "Need a hand or maybe a night with a better screwdriver?" The voice was warm, laced with humor. She turned, wiping her dusty hands on her jeans. The man leaning against the porch post was tall and lean, dressed in worn but clean carpenter's jeans and a faded t-shirt that stretched across broad shoulders. His hair was the color of wheat in late summer, tousled as if he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his eyes that caught her, a clear, calm gray, like the creek water over smooth stones. He held out a superior-looking multi-bit driver. "I'm guessing the extractor bit is what you're missing," he said, a smile playing on his lips. Ilara, used to the polished transactional interactions of her old life, was momentarily disarmed. Yes, thank you." She accepted the tool. "I'm Ilara. I just moved into Whispering Pines." "I know," he said simply. "Small town. I'm Cassian Reed. My workshop is just down the lane. I saw the truck." He nodded toward the rented pickup in her drive, and heard the creative vocabulary. A blush warmed her cheeks. "Sorry, the shed is putting up a fight. It's been empty a long time. Get stubborn." His gaze was direct, but not intrusive. "Welcome to Sparrows Creek, Ilara. If you need anything, real tools, advice on that wonky porch step, or just to know which neighbor bakes the best pie, I'm your guy." He tipped an imaginary hat and ambled off, whistling a tune she didn't recognize. Ilara stood holding the screwdriver, the first genuine, uncomplicated human interaction in years, warming her more than the afternoon sun. Cassian became a quiet, steady presence. He fixed the porch step the next day, refusing payment, accepting only a glass of lemonade. He showed her how to prune the overgrown rose bushes without murdering them. He was a craftsman, she learned, specializing in restoring antique furniture and making beautiful, bespoke pieces from reclaimed wood. His workshop, a converted barn filled with the scent of sawdust and linseed oil, was a world away from the sterile chrome and glass of Vance Capital. One afternoon, caught in a sudden downpour, she took shelter in his workshop. He was bent over a massive slab of walnut, sanding it with a rhythmic, meditative motion. Classical music, Vivaldi, she thought, swelled from an old radio. "It's beautiful," she said, watching the grain emerge under his hands. "It has a story," he said without looking up. "This was a barn beam, over 100 years old. It's been burned, weathered, nailed into. But see here?" He ran a hand over a particularly dark, knotted section. The character, the strength, it's all in the scars. Sanding it down to a bland, perfect surface would be a crime. You have to work with the history, not against it. The metaphor struck her with physical force. She had spent years trying to sand herself down, to become the smooth, flawless surface required for Liam's world. She had hidden her scars, the grief of a miscarriage they never spoke of, the loneliness, the slow erosion of herself. Cassian finally looked up. His gray eyes seemed too much. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just thinking," she managed. "That's a lovely way to see things." He shrugged, a simple, graceful movement. "It's just truth. Nothing is born perfect. Beauty is earned." He went back to sanding. "The rain's letting up. You're welcome to stay. I've got coffee that's only marginally toxic." She stayed. They talked about inconsequential things, the aggressive local squirrel he'd named Tiberius, the best time to see the fireflies in the meadow, the dubious merits of the town's lone Chinese takeout. And with every laugh, every shared silence, the numbness around Alara's heart began to thaw, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating sense of feeling. Chapter 3. The Intrusion. The bubble burst 3 months later. Alara was in the local grocery, debating between 2 brands of local honey when her phone buzzed. Not her new pay-as-you-go phone, but her old iPhone, which she kept charged out of a lingering sense of obligation. The screen showed a news alert from a financial website she'd forgotten to unsubscribe from. Vance Capital CEO faces shareholder revolt amid personal turmoil. Distracted leadership blamed for botched merger. Her blood ran cold. She clicked the link. There, in stark black and white, was her life being dissected for public consumption. The article detailed the failed Singapore deal, the falling stock price, and then the kicker. Insiders suggest Vance's focus has been compromised by a contentious and very private divorce from his wife of 12 years, socialite Alara Vance, née Thorne. The couple, once a staple of the charity circuit, have reportedly been living separately for months, with Mrs. Vance disappearing from the city scene entirely. Socialite, Mrs. Vance, disappearing. The words reduced her to a plot point in his narrative. She leaned against the cool glass of the dairy case, feeling dizzy. "Alara? You all right?" Cassian was there, a basket of simple groceries in his hand. Bread, eggs, apples. His brow was furrowed with concern. Wordlessly, she handed him the phone. He read the article, his expression growing grim. He knew she was divorced, of course. She'd told him a simplified version. A marriage that ended, a need for a fresh start. She'd never mentioned the penthouse, the private jets, the scale of Liam's world. She'd wanted to be just Alara. "I'm so sorry," Cassian said softly, handing the phone back. "That's a brutal invasion." "It's not just that," she whispered, panic rising. "If they've printed this, they'll look for me. Paparazzi, reporters, they'll find Sparrows Creek. They'll find this." She gestured around the peaceful, ordinary store, her sanctuary. Cassian's jaw tightened. He placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Let them come. This is your home. They have no right." But they did come. 2 days later, a sleek black sedan that screamed "out of town" idled at the end of her lane. A man with a long-lens camera lurked near the creek bridge. The peace was shattered. Worse than the reporters was the voicemail from Liam, left on her old phone. His voice was strained, stripped of its usual control. "Alara, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. The press is destroying me. We can fix this." We. There was no we. There was his empire, and she was now a threat to it. His pleas wasn't about her. It was about damage control. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in purples and oranges, there was a knock on her cottage door. It wasn't a reporter. It was Cassian. He held a bottle of wine and a determined look. "I'm on porch sitting duty tonight," he announced, "in case any uninvited guests get ideas." "Cassian, you don't have to." "I know," he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "I want to." He uncorked the wine and poured 2 glasses. They sat on the porch swing, the chains creaking a familiar, comforting song. The fireflies emerged in the meadow, tiny brave lights in the gathering dark. "Tell me," he said quietly, "the real story, not the tabloid version, yours." And so, under the watchful pines and the emerging stars, she did. She told him about the young, hopeful woman who fell in love with a man who made her feel like the center of the universe. She spoke of the slow, insidious shift, how the universe began to revolve solely around him, his ambitions, his image. She confessed the loneliness of crowded rooms, the hollow ache of a perfectly decorated, empty home, the grief of lost motherhood that became a forbidden topic. She told him about the final, quiet death of hope and the terrifying courage it took to walk away. She didn't cry, she just laid it bare, the wreckage of her past. Cassian listened, utterly still. When she finished, he took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, solid and real. He was a fool, Cassian said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. The greatest treasure he ever had, and he left it on a shelf to gather dust. He looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the starlight. You're not a socialite, Ilara. You're not a Mrs. Anyone. You're the woman who fights with Sheblatches, who laughs at her own jokes, who makes terrible coffee, but great lemonade. You're the woman who is brave enough to start over. That's who I see. In that moment something shifted. The space between them on the swing vanished, not by movement but by a sudden magnetic pull. The air hummed with unspoken words, with months of quiet friendship blossoming into something undeniable. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a silent question. And Ilara, for the first time in years, knew her own answer. She leaned in. The kiss was not a frantic, desperate thing. It was slow and sweet, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into a profound confirmation. It tasted of hope and red wine and the promise of a future written in a new language. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, Cassian rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day you sheared that screw, he murmured. A genuine, joyful laugh bubbled out of her. You hit it well. I was being a gentleman, and you were healing. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. Are you still healing? She looked into his eyes, at the honest, uncomplicated love she saw there, so different from the complex, conditional love she'd known. I think, she whispered, I'm starting to live again. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. The new life was fragile, beautiful, and conducted in the wary shadow of the old. Ilara's lawyer handled the divorce proceedings, which grew increasingly bitter as Liam's professional pressures mounted. He fought the settlement, not out of greed, she realized, but out of a need to maintain control, to win at something. Cassian was her rock, a steady grounding presence who held her when the anxiety of legal letters and threatening calls from Liam's associates became too much. She began to truly build a life. She started a small online business, using her long-dormant degree in art history to source and sell unique vintage textiles. She joined the Sparrows Creek Library Committee. She baked pies badly and took them to Cassian's workshop. She lived. Then, on a crisp autumn day, the past drove up in a silver luxury SUV. Ilara was in the front garden, harvesting the last of the lavender, when she saw it. Her heart seized. Liam got out. He looked older, thinner, the elegant suit hanging slightly on him. The aura of invincibility was gone, replaced by a palpable tension. Ilara. He stood by the gate, not entering, as if her grandmother's picket fence was a fortress wall. Liam. This is a surprise. She kept her voice neutral, wiping her hands on her apron. You're a hard woman to get a hold of. Your lawyer is thorough. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Can we talk, please? She considered refusing. She had every right, but she also needed closure, for herself. 5 minutes, on the porch. He followed her, his eyes taking in the cottage, the wild garden, the simple wooden swing. His expression was one of utter bewilderment, as if he'd found her living on the moon. This is where you've been? He finally asked. This is where I live, she corrected. He sat on the edge of a wicker chair, looking profoundly out of place. I came to ask you to reconsider. To come back, not for the gala or the press. For me. The words seemed to cost him dearly. I've lost everything. The deal, the board's confidence, and you. I didn't realize how much you were holding it all together. My world together. I was an idiot. A blind, arrogant idiot. Ilara listened, her heart a conflicted drum. This was the man she'd loved. Seeing him so diminished stirred old echoes of compassion, but they were just echoes. I'm sorry for what you're going through, Liam, truly, but I'm not coming back. That life, it wasn't living for me. It was a supporting role in your story. I have my own story now. His eyes, desperate, scanned her face, looking for the woman he knew. Is there someone else? The question was barely a whisper. Before she could answer, the workshop door down the lane opened, and Cassian stepped out. He was shirtless, wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana, a testament to physical work and simple living. He saw Liam, saw Ilara on the porch, and his posture changed subtly, not aggressive but protective. He gave a short, acknowledging nod, then went back inside, giving them privacy but making his presence known. Liam saw it all. The understanding that dawned on his face was not of anger, but of a deep, final defeat. He looked from Cassian's workshop to Ilara's calm, resolved face, and he saw the truth. She hadn't just left him. She had found something else, something real. I see, he said, the fight draining out of him. He stood up, a broken king in a kingdom of one. He looks solid. He is, Ilara said simply. Liam nodded, a world of regret in the gesture. I'll tell my lawyer to accept the settlement. No more fights. He walked to the porch steps, then paused. For what it's worth, Ilara, I did love you. I just forgot how to show it. I hope he never makes that mistake. He left then, the SUV disappearing down the lane in a cloud of dust. Ilara stood on the porch, watching him go, feeling the final thread of her old life snap and drift away. She felt a profound sadness, but it was clean, like the ache after a long illness breaks. Cassian appeared a few minutes later, pulling on a clean t-shirt. He didn't ask what happened. He just opened his arms. She walked into them, burying her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of sawdust and soap and him. Okay, he murmured into her hair. She looked up at him, at the love and certainty in his gray eyes, and for the first time, she believed it with every fiber of her being. Epilogue, the foundational truth. 1 year later, the Founders' Day Festival was in full swing on the Sparrows Creek Green. Music played, children laughed, and the smell of grilled food and autumn leaves filled the air. Ilara stood at the edge of the festivities, holding a cup of hot cider, watching Cassian demonstrate wood-turning at a booth for the local Artisans Guild. He caught her eye and winked, his smile a private sun. Her life was small by her old standards. Her business was modest but growing. Her home was a cottage, not a penthouse. Her social circle was the librarian, the hardware store owner, and the woman who ran the diner. And the man she loved was a carpenter who came home with wood shavings in his hair. Liam's world had moved on. He'd stabilized his company, remarried quickly to a suitable hedge fund heiress. Their story was a footnote in the business pages. Her story was here. Cassian finished his demonstration and made his way to her, slipping an arm around her waist. Ready to go home? He asked. Almost, she said, smiling. She led him to the center of the green, where the town was about to unveil its new centerpiece, a magnificent sprawling moke picnic table, big enough for the whole community. The mayor made a speech, then pulled away a canvas tarp. The crowd gasped. The table was stunning. It was made from a single, massive slab of walnut, its natural edges preserved, its grain a swirling galaxy of dark and light. The scars and knots Cassian had spoken of were not hidden. They were highlighted, sealed into the surface like medals of honor. It was strong, beautiful, and utterly unique. It's perfect, the mayor beamed, shaking Cassian's hand. You've outdone yourself, Cass. As the townspeople gathered around, touching the smooth, satiny wood, Ilara looked at the man beside her. He was watching the community enjoy his work, his face soft with satisfaction. He had built this table from a scarred, forgotten beam, seeing its potential for beauty and strength when others saw only damage. He had done the same for her. He hadn't tried to sand away her past, her pain, her history. He had taught her to see it as part of her grain, the source of her character, the foundation of her strength. She slipped her hand into his, lacing their fingers together. He looked down at her, his gray eyes full of a love that was as solid and enduring as the wood he shaped. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked, brushing a kiss against her temple. "For seeing the beauty in the scars," she said. "For building a new life with me, from the reclaimed pieces of the old." He held her gaze, the noise of the festival fading around them. "It's the only kind of life worth building, Ilara," he said softly. "The kind that's true, down to its very grain." And as they stood there, hand in hand, surrounded by their chosen family in the golden light of a fall afternoon, Ilara knew she had finally found her foundational truth. Not in skyscrapers or social registers, but in the quiet strength of a second chance, and in the enduring, crafted love of a man who knew that the most beautiful things are never perfect, they are simply and profoundly real.